It's Wellness Wednesday. Today, we're talking to a regenerative farmer who is bringing ancient grains back into popularity. He's so passionate to grow foods God's way and to bring nutrient-rich grains into the marketplace. Whether you're new to milling your own grains or if you've been milling grains for a long time, I guarantee that you're going to learn some wonderful new things from our conversation today. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the unique grain Einkorn. Have you tried it? I really love this grain, and I hope that you will learn some new things about it, and then you will love it as much as I do. So since I'm filming this after the interview, Jade wanted me to make sure that you all knew that if you are in the Grand Teton area of Idaho, to give him a call and stop by and see his farm. He is so excited to show off the wonderful regenerative farming practices that him and his family have. I am so excited, everyone, to introduce you to Jade Koyle. I have gotten to know him just a little bit in person over the last couple of months, but more importantly, I have been buying his grains for most of this year, and I'm so excited to be talking to Jade and learning about his regenerative farming practices and his grains and just learn all the goodness from him. So thank you, Jade, for being here.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you having me on.
So I had a wonderful opportunity to listen to one of your interviews not too long ago, and I thought I knew all that there was to know about ancient grains, and I was wrong. You have such a wealth of knowledge, I should say,
We'll
and
see.
yeah, we'll find out today. So let's start by talking about what does regenerative farming mean for ancient grains?
Great question. Regenerative farming is really about storing the power of the sun, the energy from the sun in our soil. We're sun farmers, sun harvesters. And there's this amazing technology that came with this earth. And it's the technology by which everything around us is growing. You know, the woods that our homes are built from, obviously all the natural habitat, everything came from because that sun provides this energy. And then from that energy, it converts it into food and everything. And all this technology that's in the earth is just fascinating to me. Underneath the soil, there are millions of different species, and their job is not one thing. They have many different jobs, but ultimately what they're going to do if they do their job right is they're going to make a nutrient dense and delicious food. And so we try to do everything we can to support them in doing that. And I like to say it's like a bird. Like a bird, you don't teach a bird how to build a nest. Nobody teaches them. They just know how to do it. They do it instinctively. And this biology is the same way. Every one of those millions of different species have a job, and they know their job. And they work together in concert in a system where one does not become dominant over another. And so everybody does their job properly. At the end of the day, you get a nutrient-dense and delicious food. And so how do you disrupt that? How do you break it? One is if you don't have enough of the structure in your soil so that that biology can thrive, get access to the oxygen, store the nutrients, and do their job. And so a lot of our soils have been so mined of the carbon and the nutrients that are in the soil that naturally come from habitat where it's constantly growing, that gets eroded. And eventually you have a soil that cannot support the life and the biology in it. And then you start finding yourself using mechanical and synthetic ways to do that. And that's what has led to much of the farm today. So we're all about using that natural system, doing nothing that puts toxicity in the soil that would harm the biology in the soil or anything that would keep them from doing their job. Instead, we're doing everything we can to support that.
That's fascinating. And I've heard parts of that like in different conversations, but you put that together so well. And my mind was going back to what were like farming practices perhaps 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and how did we get so far away from like the more natural ways that we're supposed to be farming today?
Yeah, well, it's not easy. Farming is very old. We have archaeological evidence of the Sumerians being the first, let's say, agriculturists, but my guess is it went far beyond that. If we really could get access to the records, but these people that did it anciently understood the same things, that it was an important combination of diversity and of using animals and using the biology and supporting that biology. Today on our farm, we're using a lot of cover crops, intercropping, crop rotation, and whatnot to help to accomplish this. If the books could have been written about the methods that they developed and they discovered years ago, I'll bet we'd be surprised at how much
Mm.
today we're still trying to relearn or adapt those to our specific
Yeah.
environment. If I try to use my farming method where you are, where you live, it's going to be very different than where I am. And so in some ways, we all have to take the principles and run with them and take ownership with them wherever we are.
I want to dive into ancient grains and fresh milling flour. So for me, I have my master's in nutrition. I did not learn anything
Right.
about whole grains, fresh milling flour in college. And it wasn't really until maybe like 2 years ago that I learned about it. Let's talk about what the importance of fresh milling your flour and whole grains. And why don't you speak to like the person that's listening here who has no idea about why you would want to mill your grains?
You're not alone. I've spoken to nutritionists in media. So they work for media companies and their job is to write stories
Mhm.
or to teach about it in some way for the media. And I asked them, like I've sent them our grains for them, and then I'll get on a call with them, and they have their grains, and they say, "I don't know what to do with this." I just assumed that they understood that, okay, you would need to be able to mill this or some way use it. And they did not even know it existed. So you're not alone. But the way that I learned about it is I grew up in a family that did this. I don't know if my mom started doing it or if it just never stopped. I'm not really sure,
Oh,
but milling fresh has been part of our history anciently. The Romans, they had these large stone mills in the different neighborhoods, and then people would go to that neighborhood mill to get their flour, and everybody, unfortunately they had to ration it. Well, today we have the liberty and the freedom to have this mill in our home and these grains in our home, so we can mill it just when we need it. And it really is the best way to get access to nutrients and food, because these grains store for a long time in their whole form, just the way God designed them. And then at the very moment when we're ready to use it and bake it, right there on the countertop, mill your flour and start baking with fresh flour. And you're unlocking that grain, which is designed to store all those nutrients inside of it. And you get access to a lot of fiber and protein and minerals and access to all that it gets unlocked through that fresh milled flour. And so we're big proponents of it. And like I said, I grew up that way. My mom loved to make, these a whole bunch of different kinds of breads growing up. It was a big part of her life. But one of my favorite was when she would make tortillas and do burritos and make fried burritos. And I don't know what it is about that. Having it every day as a kid, at the time I was probably getting tired of having the same meal every day, but now looking back on it, I love that meal. It's so good, and it was made with those fresh meal tortillas.
I was actually looking through the cookbook today.
Mm,
And we'll get into this a little bit later, but I was
awesome.
looking at the tortilla recipe and I need to perfect my fresh milled flour tortilla recipe.
Mhm.
So I'm excited to try this one and
Awesome.
up my game.
Yeah.
This has been a learning journey for me. And now I have like just jumped in with both feet into fresh milling flour. I teach classes because I'm just so passionate about it and excited for people to get the nutrients that they have been missing for most of their lives, except for you, which you are very blessed and fortunate to have had that for your whole life. Amazing. Can you talk to some of the specific like benefits of fresh milling versus pre-milled that would be found in the store?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. If you were to buy flour from the store, you're picking it up off of a shelf. How long has it been on that shelf? How long was it in the warehouse? It was shipped to there from a different warehouse prior to
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
And then before that, it was milled and maybe sat in the mill for a while. So just the normal food distribution system that we have today lends itself to what you see on the store shelves. And there are things that they have to do to make this work inside of the system of staying on a store shelf. They need to do things to make it last.
Mm.
And so what are the things that they will do? Well, first of all, they need to, when they mill it, there are these oils that are in the germ of that kernel. And the germ is dangerous for shelf life because oils will go rancid. And so it makes the flavor undesirable. The germ is also where there's so much nutrition, right? I mean, there's a
Mhm.
massive amount of nutrition inside of that germ. So we want access to that. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, they have to remove that germ when they ship it to the stores because it will go rancid on the shelves too quickly. So that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, they start stripping out the germ. And then they find the customers really like this white flour, not the
Mhm.
texture of the bran in it. So they removed the bran, and now they've stripped that flour of so many nutrients that they're having to add fake nutrients back in. And these fake nutrients are what so many people are finding an issue with. Like people like me who have the MTHFR, I forget what the exact acronym is.
think you
I
got it
can't
right.
digest, without assistance. And so they put those fake additives in there and it does not do well with my body. And I've had siblings who got very sick once they went to using that kind of flour. And so that's another thing is you're starting to deal with, okay, well, what's been added to this? And these mills will even go as far as having to bleach it, right? So to make it so bright and white and beautiful, they'll bleach it. And
That's
so
sad.
they're using bromate for that. So what is it that's happening to our food in all of those steps? And by milling your own, what are you avoiding?
Mhm.
All of the different potential loss of nutrients, but also contaminants that could be
Yes.
causing toxicity to you and certainly stripping it of nutrients that are good for you.
So I've been learning a little bit about the MTHFR, I think is
Right, you got it. That's it.
there are way more people in the United States that have that gene. I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah, and once your liver is blocked up, I've studied a little bit about the effects of it. Once your liver's not operating, nothing is going to work well in your body. And so, we start going to, well, I'm allergic or I can't eat this and this and this. Well,
Mhm.
what's really going on is your liver is not operating and functioning properly.
Yes,
If you have that mutation, it's obviously beneficial to look into how to help support your body to deal with that.
absolutely. And B vitamins seem to be very helpful, which are found
Yes.
in the
Nothing
wonderful
like the
whole
B
grains.
vitamin. Yeah,
Yes.
they're in there.
I would love to know what you would recommend for the first grain for a newbie in the fresh milling grain world. What grain should they start with?
When I started in this, it was 2009. A friend of mine told me about the world's most primitive form of wheat, Einkorn.
Yes.
And we were at one of our kids' dance recitals when he told me about this, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went home, started researching it, and I was able to get the domain name einkorn.com, and I put up a blog. My friend and I started blogging on it, and then we were able to find someone that had some einkorn, so we got that, and my wife started baking, and she put recipes on the site, and we're having so much fun with this einkorn as a hobby. And it was just really fascinating and enjoyable, and I've become biased about einkorn because I think it's such a cool ancient grain. And the most primitive form of wheat on earth has a different type of gluten that's easier to digest. So modern wheat has the 42 chromosomes, the A, B, and D chromosomal pair, whereas einkorn only has the A chromosome, as an A chromosomal pair. And it's just genetically more simple. Well, it presents challenges when it comes to baking because it has a weaker gluten, but it's the flavor and all of that richness that comes with einkorn that I love so much. It is my favorite,
Yes, that's
but I
good.
am a little bit biased.
I understand that. I really do. I do. I go through a lot of einkorn and I understand the challenges because I have noticed
Mhm,
that some of my breads don't rise as high as like if I were to
mhm,
use the hard white wheat with it.
mhm.
I've been playing around in the kitchen. I'm like, okay, I'm getting the feel of it and the being able to handle it a little bit better. I even had a group of friends. They all were interested in learning about einkorn. So I was like, okay, well, come on over and we'll kind of learn together. And they were interested in it because most of them were like gluten sensitive. And they had heard how wonderful einkorn is for those who are more sensitive to gluten. Not people that have celiac because
Right.
you cannot have gluten if you have celiac disease, but if they were sensitive to it. So we did a plethora of einkorn recipes and they were delicious. There's such a depth of flavor
Mm.
that is not replicatable
Yeah.
in any other grains.
And I like it. It's to me, it's more sweet. It's one of the things that we notice with the regeneratively grown grains is what's happening is the biology in the soil actually needs sugars, natural sugars to
Okay.
survive and to thrive. And those sugars come from the exudates on the roots. So the roots will drop these exudates out, and that becomes the primary food source for this entire ecosystem where certain biology is living off of that. Other biology lives off of that biology, eats them, and that it's a food chain that exists underneath there. But grains that are regeneratively grown in soil that's, we've had it regenerative for a period of time and where we're starting to see the WEOC, which is the water extractable carbon levels coming up in the soil. And we're starting to see the bricks, which is the sugar content in the grains. When
Mm.
you start to see those natural system starting to function properly, you can taste it in the grain, and it has a sweetness to it. The bitterness is gone. And so it's
Mm,
that old adage that, a healthy apple is a sweet apple. And I think that expresses itself in many ways in different kinds of
yeah,
food. I love the flavor that einkorn brings. And one of my favorite recipes actually is my wife makes this sourdough einkorn pancake that she has made this recipe for a long time, but it is just amazing. And it's so delicious. And it really brings out that side of einkorn that I just
right.
love.
That's super fascinating. Wow, I didn't know about the sugar content and that it's
Mm.
sweeter. My favorite einkorn recipe is chocolate chip cookie.
Oh, there you go.
They taste so much healthier than anything else.
Mm.
There's still fat in them, but
Oh, yeah.
they're a lot better for you than other ones out there. Since you're talking about recipes, do you have a recommendation for someone for like a starter recipe? Like they're just like, okay, gonna start fresh milling their flour next week. What would you say is the best recipe to start with?
Pancakes are a good one because you just really can't mess them up, you know? I mean, and if you've made pancakes out of one type of flour, you switch to einkorn, that's
Yeah,
one of those things where it's it's not that hard of a transition,
it's gonna
in my
forgive.
experience.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'll share my little learning experience. So my very first class that I taught for Bread 101 and fresh milled flour,
Mm.
I had a group of people that were excited and they're like, we want to make bread. Okay, so we made bread. It was like deer in the headlights. They were looking at me like, that's complicated because it's a yeast
Mhm.
bread. And I did like this Japanese method of to help it get fluffier. And they all said, that's way too complicated. So since then, I have done these simpler, like a no knead bread.
Oh, yeah.
Pancakes, that makes sense. Easy muffins.
Yeah, I'm a
Einkorn is perfect in muffins. When you don't have to worry about the rise, it's a lot easier for someone that's new to baking.
yeah, I mean, the biggest mistake people always make with einkorn is it's a stickier dough. It's going
Yeah,
to be. And so people tend to want to keep adding more flour, and you need to work with wet hands instead, or trying, like you're saying, those no knead methods and whatnot
yeah.
that lend themselves better to einkorn.
I have like these little cheat sheets in my recipe books. Like, okay, when I'm using spelt, I put this much water in the recipe, and
Mhm.
einkorn this much, and I usually do like 3 or 4 different varieties of grains
Oh,
for
I
the
love that.
recipes.
Yeah, that's the way
But
to do it right there.
there's a difference in the water content
Yeah.
to get it to like the taste and texture that I'm looking for. So,
My wife makes a multi-grain, ancient grain loaf that
oh,
sourdough, and it is so she made some today, and every time I have it, it's just amazing to me because of the flavor and the crust. I'm a big crust person, but, if you don't like crust, you might not like some of these. To me, it just adds so much texture and flavor that I'm glad to hear you're making those, and it sounds like you're playing around with it. You'll just
yeah.
change a little bit of this grain or that way, tweak your recipe a little
Y-
bit. You're getting to that point where you're pretty. I watch my wife doing that. And I see the spread that comes out, and I was like, that's advanced stuff. So that's good.
Well, it is motivational when I'm teaching classes. I have to know what is going to go wrong or what could go.
Mm.
How to improve upon what we already
Yeah,
have.
absolutely. You
That's my
always got to
goal.
be doing that.
So I'm sure that you have heard of Sue Becker,
Oh yeah,
who's
absolutely.
I have watched a lot of her videos as I'm like just learning the basics on how to use my mill, some basic simple recipes. But what would you say that you have learned being as a grower that you might want to add to her message?
Well, I think she does a really good job, and I'm not able to, I guess, speak to anything maybe specifically because she touches on about everything I could possibly imagine. But as a grower, it is a little bit different in that it's important that we understand people that often start in fresh milled flour with milling and whatnot, they often will start with something like a hard white wheat. That's probably the most
Mm,
common
yeah,
fresh milled flour grain to start with is hard white wheat. As far as what I've seen out there, that's kind of
I
the sense.
agree.
Einkorn, you're getting into more specialized and adventurous, right? But some people start there, but most people have had their experience with hard white wheat. Well, I could take hard white wheat that was grown in one field and then hard white wheat that's grown in another field. Like we're talking, a quarter mile away, a different field, right?
Yeah,
And so similar soil, but different history in the fields.
okay.
And it's going to perform very differently. The grain that you get out of it when you mill it, it's going to be very different. The protein levels could even be similar, right? And so
Mm,
you look at it, you look at the typical things that we measure when we look at the quality of a grain. They look similar, but they can still bake very differently. And that's just because of conditions that are beyond the control of everyone involved. Now, if the fields have very similar history, like even maybe different parts of the same field, you can even run into issues there because one is sandy soil or one's rocky, and
Wow.
it also express itself. The grain will express itself differently as it grows in those environments. Not to mention that, let's say that you have some hard white wheat that's grown in Minnesota and grown in Idaho, and two different parts of the country, very different climates. You can have a totally different baking experience with those. And so we get very much caught up in this idea of I bake with this hard white wheat. But
Yeah.
even if you're buying it from the same grower, it can vary from year to year. And that's just
Mhm.
something that is adventurous as you start getting into real food, is
Yeah.
that you're no longer getting this sort of sterile, consistent, exactly same thing. You're starting to
Right.
get into the real natural world that we live in and learning how to adapt to that.
That's interesting. And so my former world, I worked with a lot of chefs. I worked in the food service
Oh,
industry
yeah. Right.
for decades. Kind of what you're alluding to with the soil and the grain is true really for chefs in the back of the house, especially for the higher end restaurants. The chefs get used to the feel of the food. Like we'll just go with the sauce.
Yeah.
It's like they don't necessarily measure. They go by their feel, the look,
Mm.
and then, of course, the taste, because they'll say, well, especially if you're working with any fresh produce, if you're squeezing a lemon or something in there's every batch is different. And so
Yeah.
I like that
Absolutely.
you said adventure because it is.
Yes.
We're not dealing with all-purpose flour, which is going to be consistently, but there's no nutrition in it, so we don't even want to think about all-purpose.
Yeah.
It's a different world.
Hmm.
It's good and it's fun.
It is. And the challenge there is it presents itself every time you bake with it. And you might look back and say, I would have changed this or that, but don't ever feel like there's a perfect way to do it because the conditions in your home change, the grain can be different, and just embrace the adventure.
Yeah, that's right. So I do find this interesting. So I have some wonderful co-ops near me, and there have been times I have run out of grain. Soft white wheat in particular seems to go
Mhm.
fast at my house. And so I've gotten some soft white at a couple different co-ops. The odor is different and it does behave differently. I might have to add a little bit more flour to the recipe or something, but so it's probably again it's different batch, it's a different grower, and
Absolutely.
it's not like in a nice tight bag in the grocery store. It's sitting there in the bulk bin, so there's probably humidity and all sorts of things are happening.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And when they mill that, like the all-purpose flour is a really good example because they will set the moisture level on that so that it's consistently
Mm,
at that. And as long as it sits on shelf, that can change depending on the humidity of that environment. Obviously, it can change, but when it comes out of that mill, it's pretty consistent. They'll have it those conditions in terms of whatever they're adding in, whatever they're removing, the moisture levels, all this to the point where, yeah, it makes the baking experience definitely a little less challenging. But you've got to realize there are trade-offs that come with that.
right. I just think science experiment for
Yeah,
the flour on the shelves.
absolutely.
And we're the guinea pigs. Oh dear. So your company, now I always say Ancient Grains, but the full name is Grand Teton Ancient
Granted,
Grains,
that's right.
and you produce a lot of different grains. I would love for you to share some of the other grains that you produce.
So I already mentioned the story about Einkorn, how we started with that.
Yeah.
And it grew into spelt and rye and emmer and Coruscant. And we got a lot of requests from customers about other grains, hard white wheat, hard red wheat. And we do offer hard red and hard white. We were getting all these requests, even though we are an ancient grains company, but they wanted to fill up their box and maybe they didn't want a whole box. And they
Okay.
wanted, so if you, on our website, ancientgrains.com, if you fill up a box, you get free shipping, right? Well, they wanted to get that free shipping, but they didn't necessarily want all Einkorn or whatever. They said, I buy this hard white wheat and hard red all the time, and I would like to buy it from you guys because of how you farm with regenerative and organic. And, we test to make sure it's glyphosate free and we check for heavy metals and all this type of stuff. So they like that and they want to buy those grains from us as well. And then we have a cleaning facility, which, it can clean these different grains. And
Okay.
even though our mill is 100% dedicated to einkorn only, the grain cleaning can be done and cleaned out and changed from grain to grain. So it would make better use for us to offer more of these. Anyway, this developed into where we're going to offer a hard white and a hard red.
Yeah.
And I searched far and wide for the hard red that we wanted to offer, and we came up with Yucoro Rojo because of its baking and flavor characteristics. That kind of led us to, well, we're going to offer these modern wheats.
Yeah.
And this is the idea behind it. Even though the website's ancient grains, we'll just specifically say these are not ancient grains. And we're going to do all these things to try to build, as much value in them as we can. But at the end of the day, they are not ancient grains. But we're going to be offering more and more grains on the site, ancient and non-ancient grains. You'll see that will
Yes.
grow. The ancient grains that we offer: einkorn, spelt, emmer, Khorasan, rye. We have millet on the site too. You'll eventually see oats, black Nile barley, and several others coming. And then
Yes.
we're going to offer soft white wheat and durum and several other grains. So those are all coming down the line as well.
Corson, right? I call it
Yeah.
Kamut. I think it's called like maybe two different names.
Kamut is the brand name, and Khorasan is the name of the grain. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
The
you.
general name. Yeah.
So then you talked about durum that you are looking at starting to grow. I don't know the difference between Corson and durum. Do they have
So,
similar
yeah, um,
properties?
back on that brand name, the Kamut brand name is owned by Kamut International. Bob Quinn started that brand. They were one of the first pioneers in ancient
Okay.
grains in the United States.
Wow.
And long before anybody else was doing it, they were doing it when it was when it was very just beginning. And they have a worldwide market, and they've done a good name with the Kamut brand, but we're
Okay.
not affiliated with them. We sell all of our grain as Khorasan, which is
Okay.
just the generic name of the grain, right? Just what
Yeah.
we call it, like einkorn. It's not a brand. Anyway, so the Khorasan is interesting because it's 28 chromosomes. Modern wheat is 42. Einkorn is 12.
Okay.
So Khorasan is ancient, but just regular durum wheat is also, all durums are 28 chromosomes. And so
Interesting.
the way that durum wheat is used, it's highly vitreous, and that means when you look at it, it has a glass-like property. It almost looks like you can see through it almost. It's very
Yes.
glass-like. And Khorasan, if it looks the same way, the
Like,
vitriosity, they call it, is
yes.
very high. And so we test the vitriosity to make sure that's a characteristic of quality. But you want a highly vitreous durum or durum class, which Khorasan is like, you could call it the ancestor of durum, because
Okay.
even though they're in the same class of wheat, Khorasan is much older, much more primitive in terms of its history and everything. And when you see them grow in the field, they actually look quite similar. But when you get the kernel, the durum kernel is much shorter,
Okay.
similar to like a hard white wheat, whereas the Khorasan is a longer kernel with a crook on it there. And so they're easily identifiable if you've seen them much in the past. But the differences between them essentially are both are great for making pasta. Both you
Yes.
can make bread with, but Khorasan has a special place for us because it makes a bread that's very soft, and it is the
Buttery.
texture of it and the flavor of it is excellent. And so it's a close second for me when it comes to my favorite grade. But we also use spelt a lot, so it's hard to say. But anyway, I kind of got off the tangent there on your
Okay.
question, but
Sorry. Well, I got distracted too, but I do love Coruscant, and I have been adding like 100 grams into a lot of my breads and my tortilla, and it just adds this softer, buttery note to everything.
it does. Yeah,
It's just delicious.
it's a great one to mix in.
Okay, I would love to talk about your brand new cookbook that you guys
Yeah,
came out with.
yeah, it's
So
brand
I
new.
think it's your sister-in-law?
That's
Yes? That
Katie.
she wrote this book. It's amazing. Okay. Beautifully done. I'm impressed. I used to also work on cookbooks, so I understand the time that it took to put this together. So
Uh,
impressive. What is your favorite recipe in here?
I think the best recipe from there, Katie made us her apple pie, and it is
Nice.
outstanding.
Oh,
That apple pie recipe, the crust, it is a real
okay.
winner. Let me tell you, you have got to try it. The book is great because if you've ever tried baking with einkorn, you know that it's different, right?
Yes.
And so she has a whole tip section in there that helps with that, and recipes. So a beginner getting into einkorn, it's a great way to get started and start to learn, okay, I'm working with something different. How should I change things? And she covers all of that, and her recipes are adapted to help somebody get
Good.
started at einkorn.
I will definitely put a link to the cookbook and a link to your website in the show notes so everyone can find you. I have 2 rapid fire questions for you as we're
Okay.
wrapping up here. Okay, so what's the funniest or oddest question someone has asked you about ancient grains?
Well, most people think we're crazy as farmers for growing it, and in fact, I had one person say, "Why would you ever do that?" And I've always thought about that as kind of for me, being a little bit of a contrarian, I enjoyed it a little bit because it gives us a chance to, tell a story about why we are doing it, and I explained it to him, and it's really our customers that have kept us going
Mm,
because they believe in what we're doing and they help
yes,
us to know it matters to them.
that's
For
good.
us, this is about us making food that we want for our family and then sharing it with our customers. It starts
Okay,
first with how do we want to use a family and then
yeah,
sharing with others. And so when people work for us, they think farming with you is the hardest it could ever be because of all the regenerative things that we do and everything.
mm,
It is a challenge, but for us, it's about sharing it with our family and
yeah,
our customers.
love that. You're sharing health with
Yeah.
everybody, that's so good. Okay, and is there a grain-related habit or quirk that you or your family think is unique?
We have many of them, but I'll share you one of mine is I like to eat the grains whole.
Okay.
And so I'll just put them in a crock pot, and maybe I'll put some einkorn, millet, coruscant, and spelt and emmer in there, and like a cup and like a rice cooker, right? So you put a cup of that mixture in, just 1 cup total, whatever mixture, it doesn't matter of those, and then put in 2 cups of or a cup and a half of water and cook it with some salt. You can use it in so many different things. You can throw it into different soups and dishes. I like it, especially like a hot cereal with some milk and some fruit. And to me, like if it has the right amount of salt and you have milk and fruit, you don't even need any sweetener in there. For me, it's a really great way to get energy and nutrition for the day. It's a simple way to do it where most everybody has a rice cooker, has some way to cook that, and even
Yeah,
if you don't have a mill, it's a great way to use whole grains.
definitely I'm gonna be doing that. Here, I've only been doing, like, single grains when I've been doing it like a heated like a
Mm,
porridge, but
yeah.
blending it makes sounds so much more fun.
Yeah, it is.
Well, Jade, thank you so much for your time today. I have learned a great deal. I would love for everyone to, learn how to find you.
Well, I'm glad to have been here with you, Krista. Thank you for your time. And yeah, if anybody wants to find us, we're at ancientgrains.com. Our company is Grand Teton Ancient Grains, but the website is
Yes.
ancientgrains.com. So thanks for clarifying that. And I appreciate you having me on today. It's been great to be with you and visit with you.
Awesome, awesome. God bless everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.